my name is Catlin Tucker. I am an educator, a coach, a speaker, and an author. I have several best-selling books on the topic of blended learning. And blended learning is the combination of active engaged learning offline combined with active engaged learning online. And depending on the age of the students we're working with, the online component can happen entirely in the classroom, or it can extend beyond the classroom for students who are older or have access outside of the classroom to devices and internet. But it is that combination of active engaged learning online with active engaged learning offline. And the term blended learning is like an umbrella. So underneath the umbrella, there are a lot of different models, and the different models give students different degrees of control over 4 elements of their learning: time, place, pace, and path. So they don't get to control all of them all of the time, but different models give them different degrees of control over those aspects of their learning, because essentially blended learning is a shift in control from the teacher to the learner. So the models are designed to give them more control over their learning. Now, when we think about the online learning environment, oftentimes teachers aren't thinking of blended learning, they're thinking of online learning, right? I had to take all of my offline classes and move them online, and now we're learning online together. But I still encourage teachers to think about how are they weaving offline learning into their online classes. So even though students are learning online right now, how are we building in opportunities to engage them offline? Are we driving them offline to engage in activities that are more experiential and tactile? And then for teachers, often they worry, if I send students offline to do work, how will I know what they did? How can I appreciate the work that they're doing offline? So I encourage teachers to tell their students to treat their offline learning like they're creating a documentary. Can they take pictures? Can they take video or time-lapse video of the work they're doing offline and then share that in the online environment? Post pictures with a reflection, or post a link to a video with a reflection. So I've seen lots of math teachers who have had students engage in kind of offline math challenges where they're taking measurements around their house, and science teachers who are asking students to do kind of simple labs in their kitchens or their backyards and then documenting that and sharing it. And you can have them reflect on the experience, like what did they learn? What went well? What challenges did they hit? What questions do they have? So really honoring that offline learning, even in a time of online courses and social distancing and students learning remotely. So 3 tips for good distance teaching. There's a lot involved in being an online teacher. I would say 3 really good tips to think about is: 1, if you can get a week ahead of your students, that is ideal. And I know that's a big ask for teachers who didn't have a lot of warning about taking their offline classes online. But if you can get a week ahead of your students and then put the work for the week online on a Sunday evening or a Monday morning, and then give students the entire week to tackle those different assignments, then you allow students to enjoy the flexibility that online learning affords. If teachers post something every single day, then students kind of feel like they have to do that work that day. They don't have the time to kind of determine the pace at which they complete assignments. And, our students are sharing spaces with their families. They might be sharing devices, sharing bandwidth. And so we can't assume that they're going to have several hours each day to focus on their work without being interrupted. So giving them that week, that flexibility, is really important. The second tip I would give teachers is to build community online. Even though we might feel like we had a really strong community in the classroom, we can't assume that that community is going to translate into the online environment. I think it's really important that teachers engage students in conversations about how do we set expectations for our engagement online? What are some of the things we're going to do online to make other people feel safe and supported? And then maybe we post some icebreaker questions in an online discussion to facilitate conversations between students so that they're building relationships online and feel comfortable engaging with each other, or if we're going to host a synchronous Zoom call or a video conference session, maybe starting that session with a quick check-in, like a high, low, what's going well, what's not going so great, what are you struggling with, so that students feel like they're still connecting with a learning community, even though they're learning remotely. And then the third piece of advice I would give teachers is to think about how we're using feedback to encourage students to lean into the learning online. So instead of just giving feedback via text, comments on student work, I would suggest thinking about how can I leave more dynamic feedback? How can I use video recording tools to record video feedback? So if students submit work, I pull the work up on my computer, I record a screencast of their work, and I go through and talk about what I'm seeing that's done well, where are the gaps, what needs development. Because if you look at the research on feedback online, the research shows that video feedback and audio feedback are much more effective than simply text feedback. So if you can find a tool, like if you're using Google Documents with students, if you can use a tool like Kaizena, which is a Google Doc add-on to allow you to leave audio comments, or if you can use a screen recording tool like Screencastify to record a video, those are going to help students more than simply text comments, because it feels more personal, it feels more detailed, and definitely will help them to hopefully act on that feedback. The next question is, how do you engage, or how do we increase students' engagement? And I think it kind of dovetails from the last question, which is we can increase student engagement by giving them more agency, allowing them to make decisions about their learning. Can we give them some flexibility in terms of deciding what they focus on, what they're learning, how they're doing something, what they want to create to show they have learned? Any form of agency in a lesson is going to be more interesting for students, or make the lesson more interesting for students. If they feel connected to a learning community, they're more likely to lean into learning, to engage with the content, with the teacher, with each other. And I think the more they get personalized feedback that's more dynamic than maybe just typed notes or messages, the more they're going to see the value of the work we're asking them to do. And then the last question is, do you think distance learning will be used intensively after this emergency? I do. I hope that as terrible as the situation is, and as many teachers who've been caught off guard by this, I hope that one small silver lining is that teachers are more open to the idea of engaging students online. There are so many different things that happen. So I live in California, and we have had just a series of awful fires, wildfires, that have closed schools for weeks at a time. And there are places where the weather events close schools, or now we have a pandemic that's closing schools for months. Learning shouldn't be interrupted. It shouldn't have to stop because schools close. We have the technology to continue that learning online. And so I hope people in this moment, when they're trying to engage students online, they see some of the benefits of online learning, so that when we go back to our classrooms, we're more willing to weave the online learning components into our traditional classes, so that if we're faced with another emergency like this, we're more equipped to take the learning online, that learning doesn't have to stop just because there's some kind of an emergency. So I do think to some degree, schools are going to start to prepare for the unexpected and hopefully support teachers in learning how to take the offline learning online and really blend those two learning landscapes together.